Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the last two episodes, we've been talking about health and nutrition. This is a very, very, very broad subject. And, you know, we've seen how some of our practices have not only affected humans, but it's affected the other creatures on Earth. Like I think one of the things I mentioned in the last episode was the butterflies and the bees. And prior to that, they found that because of some of the pollutants we were dumping into water, caused frogs to be born with 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 legs and 2 heads. And these are things that are all warnings to us. And just as, and you have to understand, Islam is not against scientific advancement. You know, I was just reading another ayat here. I won't read the same two that I read last 2 episodes about, you know, eat what's good and natural. But here in ayat 89 in Surah 17, Al-Isra, Surah meaning chapter, ayat meaning verse. And indeed we have fully explained to mankind in this Quran, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And indeed we have fully explained to mankind in this Quran every kind of similitude. But most of mankind refuse the truth and accept nothing but disbelief. And you know, and it goes on to say, and they say, we shall not believe in you, talking about Prophet Muhammad, until you cause a spring to gush forth from the earth for us. The reason I read that is because you have different ideas about who we are, where we come from, what we're supposed to be doing. And the Quran explains all of that. It explains it all. And through the last 1442 years, since to be, actually that's from the Hijrah, not the beginning of revelation of Quran, we have our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a role model of someone who we in this world today, you know, some people would say he was ignorant. He was not ignorant. Some people would say he was uneducated. He was educated, but he was educated by Almighty God. Some people, but he could not read or write throughout his lifetime, and we have proof of that. Okay? There are those who try to say, oh, he had to be able to read and write, and did it this day and time. There are people who say, oh, he had to be able to read and write because how could he have produced a book like this? How could something like this have come from him? How could he have done it? And if you understand our concept of God, what we call Tawheed, the oneness of God, there's only one God. And if you understand how we view this life, it's what we call the dunya, okay? And that we're all here. And we've been told that this dunya, this life, is a place of torment and discomfort and hell for the people who believe in God. And for those who don't believe in God, it's heavenly. Now that's not to say that every rich person, every person of wealth is an evil person. No, it's not saying that at all, because Muslims have always had wealthy people. Right from the time of Prophet Muhammad till this day, some of the greatest wealth in the human family has always been concentrated amongst the Muslims. And that wealth transmits into influence in the society, oftentimes. We're talking about nutrition. How does that come into the society? What does it have to do with anything? Because most people in the world want to eat what the wealthy people eat. They think that they have the sweet meats and the best this and the best of that. But they also had the greatest illnesses. Poor people, traditionally, were always thinner, not because of malnutrition in particular, but because the food that they ate didn't lay in their bodies, didn't weigh them down. And we always, that is, poor people, which I consider myself to be one of, all right, but not impoverished, poor, have always eaten the basic foods. But now, in today's world, even the basic foods are being tampered with. And so now it's the poor people who are starting to suffer. And their nutrition is changing. The things that they need for energy and strength is being modified in such a way, from what I've been able to read in the newspapers, not an opinion, not a conspiracy theory, just based on statistics, all right, is something that has put them in a position where they no longer have the little backyard gardens because they can't own a little piece of land anymore. So they go to the supermarket and they buy things that are manufactured, things that are changed so it can be cheap, so that they can buy it, and at the same time when they eat it, it causes them health issues. So these are all things that we're dealing with here. And I'm going to go back to our brother Abdullah and ask him to take up from there, please.
Yes. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. Wassalatu wassalamu ala khayri anbiya wa mursaleen Muhammad. And may the peace and blessings of Allah be upon the best of his prophets and messengers, Muhammad, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. You mentioned something very important. I think you said something to the effect of that this life for the believers is made like a prison, like because of a prison, something that confines you, it gives you boundaries to operate in, and those are the things that we use to guide. And one of the things I appreciate the most in terms of looking at nutrition and looking at public health in the broadest and more specific places that Islam divides how we the two parts of our brain, left and right, and Islam in legislation is divided into two ways. The first one, is that all things in terms of our interactions with each other, mu'amalat, the interactions, everything is permissible. Allah tells us in the Quran, هُوَ الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ جَمِيعًا. If I get that right, is that He's made everything in the earth for us, permissible. And the way I understood or learned is that this is what this is what is being used to say that all the things in terms of our transactions are permissible. On the other end, the other aspect of our life is our interaction with Allah and how we worship Him. The basis of that one is that everything is impermissible, except if there's a proof, meaning that you don't worship Allah any way you want to. There has to be guidance, and that's what we get from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Our food and business, the basis, everything is permissible, and say it's not, there has to be some type of proof. You mentioned the aspect of the economics and the nutrition aspect, and really these topics come together in the science. There's no way to really separate them into little neat compartments. When we talk about food, we're talking about our bodies, and we're also talking about trying to business, because it doesn't come for free. It takes toiling the earth and such forth, and the science part is a big part of that too, trying to improve it, and the science of trying to improve the value in it, and the science of trying to get better profit out of it. They come together and not exhaust your soil. So like you mentioned, it is something very, very broad, but working on the mindset, how we approach it, is very important. Is that, food is one of those things, it's permissible, everything's permissible, but if we do it with the mindset that it strengthens us to serve Allah alone with no partners, by following the example of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with the understanding of his companions, that's the applied, function of why we eat. So we want to fuel it with we want to have the best quality foods that we want.
Because food is not just nutritious, it's also healing.
It can be, and it depends on the amount. And I think that's one thing we touched upon outside, is that when we talk about the benefit versus harm, it's talking about degrees. When we're talking about science, genetic manipulation, and economic benefit, we're talking about degrees, because it's only a degree. When something gets too much out of balance, there's harm, if it goes one way or the other. And it's not really a simple thing. Yeah. Even
I know what you're saying, and one of the things that we have to be conscientious of, You know, I look at this orange, and you know what I see here? I see delicious, beautiful, vitamin C, and penicillin. Okay? Because as I recall, the original method of producing penicillin came from oranges, I think. It was the mold or something like that.
I'm not sure which food
Right.
they use. I
But
know it fought scurvy, but
yeah, also those were lemons primarily.
basically,
the
yeah, well,
vitamin
citrus,
C,
yeah.
yeah, citrus fruits. You know, so that's why, you know, I was thinking about, you know, the healing and the nutrition, okay? But at the same time, you know, if you eat white bread, okay, or if you eat potato chips or corn chips or whatever, you know, the various, you know, tons of ice cream, unless the ice cream is made with honey and whole milk, okay? Difference is, it'll make you sick.
the amount, yeah, it can.
Yeah, the quantity, okay? If you have, you know, there's so many things that Allah has given us that there's a duality in it, okay? There's a duality in it. And what happens is that duality can serve to help us or to hurt us, okay? Depending upon how we approach it. Like you were mentioning before, the things that we do, we don't eat for nutrition, okay? Primarily, we eat because Allah has made us to experience hunger and thirst. And this is, once we get hungry, we eat. But He originally gave us things, from what I can understand it, and from what I read from history. I remember one of the American folklore is this guy, Johnny Appleseed. You heard of him, right?
Yes.
And he used to go around America planting apple trees every place.
Yeah.
Okay? And his idea was that, you know, apples were so good. Remember the apple a day keeps the doctor away?
That they promote.
They were
yes.
so good that you could, you know, just be walking, and you'd be hungry, and you see, oh, there's an apple tree. Let me have one. Okay? Or peaches. These things grow any place just about. Dates, wow. Literally, you could take a date seed and throw it any place, and it'll grow. Okay? I say literally. I'm sure there's some places it won't. What I'm getting at is this. When we start talking about commercial aspects of food, what we've done is we have placed ourselves in a position now where we're starting to see profit over what our God has given us. And it's more important for us for some of us to monopolize that product and to get it to people so we can live better than them. Okay? And maybe some people will find a way to do this that it's beneficial, like Abdul Rahman ibn Auf, who's one of our financial histories, one of our financial heroes, who was a companion of Prophet Muhammad, or Uthman ibn Affan, or Mansa Musa from Africa, who took 70% of the people in his nation on Hajj. Wealthy man. So in fact, they say he's the wealthiest man to have ever lived.
History.
To have ever lived to this day. That's with Jeff Bezos being worth 180 billion or whatever the case may be. They say Mansa Musa's fortune was greater, but he was a Muslim and people benefited from his wealth. Okay? And, you know, all of these things come into our lives as human beings. And as Muslims, we are not supposed to look at things in the way that the people in the world generally see it. Yes, we have wealth. We've always had wealth. But also Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to become very, very, very agitated in a negative way, in a bad way, whenever it was spoken of how much wealth the people of his ummah would have. He'd become very upset. All right, when I read the hadith in Sahih Muslim, it would say how he would become flushed and he'd become agitated. That's the word that was used, okay, in English, okay? And, you know, and we look at our history, we look at the the different communities, the Muslims in India, the Mughals, all right, and the kind of wealth that they possessed. Or we look at the Muslims in Spain, and and Mughals were not the only wealthy Muslims in India, okay? They had so much wealth, the Muslims did, that they would take it and put it in I remember reading one book, maybe for another subject, but his grandfather had left him a palace. He went into the palace, and there were these jars in the bottom, huge area with jars. And the jars were as high as a man, okay? And he opened them up, and they were all filled with pearls, okay? But at the same time, what they used to do is when they were trying to impress people, especially when the British first came to India, okay, is they would kill a cow, and they would stuff the cow with pheasant tongues. This is a recipe. And when I first read this, I said, how many pheasants do you have to kill to stuff a cow with their tongues? Okay?
Yeah.
And all these exotic foods that they used to eat, okay? And you see that the health of the people was declining with the more, how can you say, the more...
wealth, maybe.
Wealth, okay? And also with the complications that came about as to what they were eating, they were consuming for their energy. And one of the results is that every time we as Muslims began to neglect the poor in our society, because at the same time that they were feeding the British with these cows stuffed with pheasant tongues, there was a starvation taking place in India and another area where more than 10 million people at that time. 10 million was a lot in India. Today it's like less than 1%, I think, okay? Which is still a lot of people, okay? We're starving to death, okay? So we begin to neglect and to not pay attention to the poor. And at the same time, we can see the nutrition, we can see the health of people declining. We can see that not only that, but the social fabric of the society was declining, okay? And this is what eventually led to what? Another humiliation for the Muslims. Overthrow of the Muslim control and the Muslim guidance for the nation of India, okay? So Spain is not the only humiliation. India was one, Italy was one, but it's whenever we begin to neglect, and nutrition became a part of one of the things that we would neglect.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things you mentioned. I'm just going to focus on in the beginning, you mentioned penicillin as an example. Mm-hmm. Is that, I wasn't sure whether it comes from an orange or what, but penicillin essentially is what? Fungus, from my understanding. Mm-hmm. You would never eat fungus and think to get a benefit from it.
What about mushrooms?
Well, you would never eat, well, it depends on the kind. The point I'm making is that everything has an amount. So there was a benefit, and that's the sliding scale that Islam allows us to use. Is that so for a fungus, something that's fungus, a green thing growing on food that you would never touch it. But in the specific amount, the miqdar, the small amount, there was some benefit that fought some other type of disease. So that range, we have to embrace the range of exploration, which allowed Islam to grow, and also express the boundaries, and use that as those flag posts to guide us in that exploration. So penicillin was something you would never eat by itself, but from that bit, there was some benefit from that, but only within its amount. Mm-hmm. Anything more, it would cause a harm.
Yeah. This is really an interesting subject. And, look at the range of different topics we've touched. Just talking about food, talking about nutrition, talking about public health, okay? And how everything is tied together, okay? And these are things that Allah constantly encourages us to public service, to get involved in, okay? Public service. If you own a restaurant, it's public service. If you understand what you're supposed to be doing, okay? If you own a health facility, whether it's a hospital or a clinic or whatever the case may be, public service, okay? And it's that, you're helping people within the society to be able to stay healthy so that they can function in such a way as to benefit the overall society. When it becomes just a thing of making money and it becomes a selfish thing for you, and you give people anything. And the result is chaos grows, chaos spreads, and eventually it leads to humiliation. Humiliation how? It is that people come and they say, whoa, look what these people have done to themselves.
Out of balance.
Out of balance.
Maintaining some type of balance.
Yeah. Okay? And see, that's what Islam does. Allah in His Quran tells us how to maintain the balance. And therefore, it enables the society to become a place of sakina, tranquility. And that's one of the ways that Islam works.